Analysis. Who is he I love more than me? It is a statement by Lacan. In fact, it is a part of a much longer statement made by Lacan. Context, however, is the same. Context in which Lacan made the statement and the context in which I am using the statement for today's discussion is the same. Context being, why is it that in therapy, when I know release of affect towards somebody in the therapy room will heal me, and yet I don't do it? Who is he who I love so much that even in the therapy room, even in my imagination, even when I am alone with the therapist, I am not able to express my difficult feelings of anger, pain, guilt, shame, envy towards somebody in whom I am emotionally invested, maybe my father, mother, wife, children, teacher, anybody. But there is somebody related to whom I have a strong ambivalent feelings. And because I'm not able to express the difficult part of that ambivalent situation in terms of affect release, I am not able to move ahead on the path of healing. Even after doing this fully well, many patients are not able to move forward and feel, accept, and release their difficult feelings, especially of anger, towards somebody who is emotionally very close to them. And this is the context of today's talk. Who is he I love more than me? Who is he who I love so much that if it comes to a choice between expressing my difficult feelings towards him in therapy and continuing to suffer, I choose to continue to suffer. We go deeper today on this theme of who is he I love more than me. Who is he I love more than me? The context for this is very easy. The mainstream context is the context of accepting natural narcissism, which says that I love myself more than I love anyone else in this world. And this, my loving myself more than anyone else, is a natural given. It's a given of very natural narcissism. We take it to be inseparable part of human nature, that at the bottom of everything, every individual loves himself more than anyone or anything else. And this natural narcissism is accepted as natural. And in this context, it becomes even more interesting to explore our theme for the day. Because this, given this context that with which we operate usually, tells us that if it comes to choice between my healing and expression of emotion towards somebody, it's not a question, it's not even a question. I will choose my healing over somebody else. And this is what the context is, that normally we believe it should be so. That there is a natural narcissism. We love ourselves more than anyone else, and therefore it should be very easy for us and natural for us to choose our healing versus expressing emotions towards somebody, especially more so in the therapy room when that somebody is not present and is never likely to know what happens in the therapy room. In this background, we explore our topic. We start by saying that although we believe, and it is generally true, that the fact of natural narcissism exists universally, despite that, we find an exception in psychotherapy. And the exception is not of a microscopic minority. It is an exception of a substantially large group of patients. Patients who prefer to suffer than to express their deepest of feelings towards somebody emotionally important to them, even when that person is not present in the therapy room, even when that person is never going to know what is being expressed towards him in the therapy room, even when such a safe situation exists, even in such a safe situation, the patient prefers to suffer than to attack anybody or express feelings towards anybody very dear to him emotionally. So the patient says, of course, there is one group of patients who will express their feelings, get well, and move on. We are not referring to that group of patients. We are referring to the other group of patients who are stuck in therapy, who know they have difficult feelings towards significant others, but despite knowing it and despite at times even resolving to release them consciously, they are not able to do it. So we are referring to that difficult group of patients in our discussion today. The patient says, I prefer to suffer than to lose him or attack him. So one of the fears of expressing difficult feelings in therapy is the unconscious of the patient believes that if he expresses anger or something shameful or something unacceptable towards the father or mother or wife or child or anyone else emotionally significant, the other will abandon the patient and the patient will lose him. Or the other person will attack the patient. So even in therapy, patients are not able to allow their difficult feelings to be expressed because of the fear of losing the person or the fear that the person will attack them. And both of them are irrational because neither that person is present nor is going to ever know what has been expressed towards him. Despite all this rationality, the unconscious of the patient believes that the person towards whom feelings are being expressed either is present or will know it, as though that person is omnipotent, omnipresent, and the person will then attack the patient or abandon the patient. So even in therapy room, the fear of loss or attack is so high, almost as though it is extension of the real life. In real life, the person is not able to express feelings because of the fear of loss or attack, fear of losing the person or the person attacking him. And therefore, the feelings are repressed. And the same fears of loss or attack continue even in the therapy room. So even in the therapy room, when the person is only with the therapist, the fear of loss or attack continues and the person is not able to express his deepest feelings. Even when we ask the person to imagine in the therapy room or we give exercises for guided imagination, even in fantasy, the person is not able to do it. Like somebody wants to slap his mother or father, they find it difficult even in fantasy to do it. Of course, after a long period of time, they are able to do it, but initially they find it even difficult in fantasy to do it. So this is a very large group of patients, those who are into personality disorders or psychosis or something very chronic, long-standing. They find it difficult to express their deepest of feelings, even in therapy or in fantasy. So this is an exception to the context of natural narcissism. And similarly, there is another exception also. We said first, there's something called natural narcissism, which we accept as given, natural and true. Then there is an exception to it that we find in psychotherapy. And then there is also an exception to this context of natural narcissism, which we find in contexts where people love their country more than themselves, their religion more than themselves, their child more than themselves, some ideal, some altruism more than themselves. So there is also a healthy counterpart of this idea, who is he I love more than me? So that he does not necessarily have to be a emotionally significant person, that he can also be something very noble, very idealistic, very altruistic. However, we have to make a clear point that the context of natural narcissism is the rule, while I love someone more than me is an exception. I love myself more than others is the rule. I love someone more than me is an exception. And this exception happens in various contexts. In pathological context, as we said in therapy, or in an idealistic context, as we discussed. So there is a rule at work, and there is an exception at work. And this exception is not a microscopic exception. It is an exception which constitutes of a large group of chronic patients. So the rule that we are discussing, the rule is I love myself more than others. But what is the exception? I cannot express my deepest of feelings in reality, in imagination, or in therapy. In either of these three situations, expression of rage, of pain, and other difficult feelings cannot be done. And this is the exception with which we are struggling. And as I said, this is not a microscopic exception. This is a large exception, where the patient chooses suffering, but will not release the feelings, will not accept the feelings, will not feel the feelings, will not release and let go of the feelings. And this, who is he I love more than me, because of which I prefer suffering over healing, that we see very vividly in pathological situations of personality disorders, psychosis, addiction, depression, somatization, and situations of self-harm. In all these situations, we see very vividly that the person loves somebody more than he loves himself. Why does the person do it? Why should a person love someone more than himself? Why should a person why should a person choose suffering over healing? How does psychoanalysis explain this paradoxical fact? First, there is a mind-reality confusion, meaning the unconscious of the person believes that what he does in the mind will actually happen in reality. So if I kill somebody in the mind, in reality also the person will die. Of course, the conscious part of the mind knows it is not so, that you can think anything, everything that you think does not happen in reality. But this is the adult part of the mind. There is a unconscious child part of the mind which believes that what happens in the mind happens in reality. So this is the first reason why many people hold back expression of their deepest feelings, because the unconscious believes if they express their aggression and kill somebody or torture somebody in imagination, in reality it will also happen. Second holdback is from standards the person has set for himself deep inside of him. The standard can be a moral standard that the brutal rage I have is immoral, no one should have it and no one should express it. So it's a moral standard which does not allow him to express his rage towards parents or towards significant others, even in therapy. Or there is shame. What will the therapist think of me? It is shameful to have such feelings. Or if I go into killing, how will I look when I'm doing that to the therapist? And there is an image problem, the problem of a perfect image. So these are the second categories of holdbacks, the standards I set for myself. Standards related to morality, standards related to my image. Third, unconscious belief in the omnipotence of that person. And this is more true about parents, especially the mother. The omnipotence, the unconscious mind believes that the other person is omnipotent, and even if I express my rage, even if I express my death wish, my torturous wish, I will not be able to annihilate that person, and the person then will seek even more brutal revenge. So I am up against an unwinnable situation. I cannot defeat the person, and the person will thereafter, after my attack me even more brutally. So it is a lost battle even before it begins, and therefore rage is not expressed. Fourth is space confusion. The person in the unconscious mind doesn't believe that the therapy space is separate from the space in which the person lives with that person, or where that person used to live against whom he has difficult feelings. And therefore, the person is either next door or will walk in anytime inside, or the person is maybe right inside the therapy room in a psychological sense. Second problem is, what if after expressing the rage does not stop and the person carries it on and does something in the real life? Except for those who have impulse control problems or those who can go manic or psychotic, this is not really the situation for most people. But there is still a confusion of separation of space. Fifth reason why people hold back and don't move on to healing is the fear of guilt. That after I express my rage in the session, after the session is over, there is an attack of guilt. And that attack of guilt causes very high amounts of anxiety, feelings of disgust and vomiting-like sensations, feelings of unease, feelings of sadness, and that state I don't want. Sixth reason, there is a fear of attack. That after I attack the person will attack me even more. Seventh is the fear of loss. If I attack the person will know it and I will lose that person. And that loss is even more terrifying than my suffering. Similarly, the attack is even more terrifying than my suffering. Pain of attack and loss is more than the pain of suffering. So the patient chooses to suffer rather than move on the path of healing. Because on the path of healing, he sees more suffering than the suffering from the symptom. One more situation where a person chooses suffering is because he is taking revenge by self-destruction. That he has strong ambivalent feelings towards people near to him, mostly the parents, or the lover, or the husband, or the children. But he has strong ambivalent feelings. It's a pathological ambivalence. It's not a healthy ambivalence. It's a pathological ambivalence of very strong positive feelings and very strong negative feelings towards the same person. And because of this situation, he cannot express in real life the difficult feeling he has towards the person. And that those feelings then turn inwards, particularly anger. It turns inwards and becomes self-destructive. And the person then who wants to hurt his parents or somebody near to him, he cannot do it directly, hurts them by hurting oneself. So the self-destruction is a form of revenge. By hurting oneself, he hurts those who really he wants to hurt, who actually have hurt him before. So one of the situations is the person seeks revenge by self-destruction, and therefore he does not want to heal. He wants self-destruction to continue because his revenge is still not complete. And the revenge is so strong, the feeling of revenge is so strong, that he does not want to complete the revenge in the therapy room in imagination. He really wants it in the real life. And the 10th and the most esoteric to find, recognize and understand and work upon is the problem of ecstasy. Patients are not able, of course, a group of patients, not all patients. One group of patients will not be able to release their feelings, especially towards parents or lovers or husbands, mostly parents, because they are fused with the person towards whom they have difficult feelings. And in that fusion, there is an intense ecstasy in the unconscious mind. So it is the ecstasy which is felt of fusion with the person towards whom one has difficult feelings of anger, guilt, and pain. And one does not want to let go of that fusion and that ecstasy. So on the surface, there is suffering, but in that entanglement at the unconscious level, there is intense ecstasy of fusion. And this is disturbed by the healing process. And therefore, the person does not want the healing process to go deep enough where it can displace or affect in some way the ecstasy of the fusion process. So these are 10 reasons why a person chooses to suffer and not move ahead on the path of healing by holding back difficult feelings inside him and not allowing the difficult feelings to be expressed in therapy, to feel them fully and let go, release them and be healthy. So there may be more reasons, but these are very common 10 unconscious reasons, and the 10th is the most difficult to make out. The ecstasy of fusion. Freud talked about the neurotic gains, that in every neurotic suffering, there is unconscious pleasure, which is the most difficult to accept and displace, which is true. And one of the specific forms of that pleasure is the ecstasy of fusion towards a person with whom one has a pathological ambivalent relationship. And it is towards this person that one has very strong negative feelings one is not ready to let go of in therapy room. There can be one more, 11th, which I have not mentioned, but I can mention verbally. If the ego is very fragile, and if there are very few people in the person's life, the person is holding on to some person as ego stabilizer. And if towards that person you have difficult feelings, you cannot express them because you fear the disintegration of ego because of loss of that object, because anyway you have very few objects to whom the person is related to. So if the person is related to very few people, the person's ego strength is low and fragile, and then you're asking the person to express feelings towards one of those few people he is related to, then it is difficult because then there is a fear of ego disintegration because of object loss. So these are 11 instances where one is not able to express difficult feelings, and by doing so, one chooses to continue suffering over healing. Last point in the last slide, we talked about ecstasy. Second last point, we talked about ecstasy. So let us go in slightly details of this ecstasy, the unconscious ecstasy of fusion of different sorts. We explore it slightly more. It's very difficult to understand, make out, and work with. Very few people even realize it is at work. So the unconscious ecstasy is the ecstasy of omnipotence and fusion. The person experiences ecstasy just by the presence of the other person, because all good object projections are projected onto that other person. And because of that projection, the other person appears to the unconscious mind as the all good, omnipotent, all good object. And there is ecstasy just by the presence of that person, just by looking at that person. So that person, he is the occasion of my ecstasy. I look at such a person and I experience unconsciously the ecstasy. He is the source of my ecstasy. I don't believe that I can generate ecstasy without him. It is only when he appears before me that ecstasy is evoked in me, which is not true. We'll see it later. But this is how it is felt. That he is the occasion of my ecstasy. He is the source of my ecstasy. He is the source of my reverie. Once I know he is with me, he is related to me, he is looking after me, I can go into my state of reverie. He is the source of my omnipotence, and I cannot let go of my desire for omnipotence. And I know I cannot be omnipotent, so I have to live it vicariously through him. I love my omnipotence, my ecstasy, my security more than my healing. So at the root of it, I love my own omnipotence, my ecstasy, my security with the omnipotent good object that I feel. And I go on cloud 7 if the omnipotent all good object admires me. That admiration from an all good object is intoxicating. I just go manic when it comes. Even the prospect of it coming makes me go manic. So I love my omnipotence, my ecstasy, my security my intoxication that comes from him more than my healing. So I don't love anyone else more than me. I love my ecstasy and omnipotence and security and my intoxication more than anything else. I love it more than my healing. So I don't love anyone. So I don't love anyone else more than me. When I say I choose suffering in this particular situation, I am not selecting suffering. It's only on the surface it appears that I am selecting suffering over healing. But in the unconscious mind, I am selecting my ecstasy over healing. And if I get healed, I won't get so much of happiness, which I get from this ecstasy. So in the unconscious mind, getting healed is a loss-making proposition from a pleasure point of view. So it is still a pleasure movement which sustains the sickness. Because healing will bring me to reality. It will not allow me this intense, authentic, feel it in the bones kind of solid concrete ecstasy. There is a natural desire in all of us to feel positive effects in a very concrete, very strong way, very intense way. And ecstasy comes near, this feeling of ecstasy we are referring to comes nearest to the intensity of that positive effect, which we all wish to feel in our bones and nerves. And if we look at our ordinary positive effects, the thing is so intense, so authentic, so concrete, so pleasant, like this ecstasy. Therefore, we can't let go of this ecstasy. And therefore, it is a paradox of two internal loves, the love for healing and the love for ecstasy. And it is not a contest between self-love and other love, which it appears on the surface. And therefore, it's a wrong framing of the phenomena in absence of deeper unconscious insight. So on the surface, it appears, who is he I love more than me? But in the unconscious mind, I love ecstasy more than my healing. And it's a contest between two loves, the love for ecstasy and the love for healing. And the love for ecstasy for the present is winning over the love for healing. How do we then proceed to the healing of it? First, we have to bring to bear wisdom upon love. Where id was, there ego shall be. So we have to bring to bear wisdom upon this love of ecstasy. That the love, the search for omnipotence, the search for ecstasy are correct goals, but are being pursued in a pathological way. So first is we have to uncover the phenomena and bring it to the light and notice of the person that this is what is there. And it's a question of discovery, not a question of knowledge being given to somebody. Because this is so esoteric, so mystical, so deep, so subtle that unless one self-discovers, it doesn't operate in anybody. And no one actually truly believes that it is actually at work. So first, the person has to self-discover what we had discussed in the last slide, accept it to be true, and then when he's trying to correct it, we have to help him by this wisdom of bringing to bear wisdom upon love. The person has to recognize that self-love is at the root and it has to be recognized and reorganized. Nothing wrong with self-love, nothing wrong with search for ecstasy, nothing wrong with search for omnipotence. It is just that it has to be recognized and consciously reorganized. Ecstasy, the way it moves, the way it is enjoyed, the way it is activated, that has to be reconfigured. We have to sublimate this entire life cycle of ecstasy. Wisdom has to bear upon the relations in the world of mortality, inevitability, and ambivalence. This calls for reality acceptance. That we live in a world of mortality, inevitability, and ambivalence. We don't live in a world of absolutes. And therefore, the good part of the good end of the continuum of the absolute also does not exist. And we have to accept it with mourning that an absolute good, an omnipotent good object doesn't exist. And this ecstasy can exist only in the unconscious mind with a fixation and regression to very early part of life. In the reality, in the outer world, we don't experience such ecstasy. So that wisdom has to bring upon, wisdom has to bear upon, put its light on the nature and limits of the real world and the relations in the real world. Partial renunciation of ecstasy is necessary for good health and reality. So partly it is renounced, which calls for mourning, and partly it is sublimated. This calls for reality acceptance and mourning. Even after one has done this part, there can be occasional revisits to this intoxication. Sorry, there can be occasional revisit to this intoxication. Nothing wrong with it. Intoxication can also be found in other areas of life, like sports, ideals, spirituality, renunciation, authenticity. So intoxication can be found in other areas of life, like sports, ideals, spirituality, new relationships, some hobbies, achievements. And we are now looking at part renunciation and part quest for authenticity and intensity in the modes. So part of the quest for ecstasy and intoxication is announced and mourned in reality acceptance. And part of it is sought to be experienced through authenticity and intense affect in one's bones, very intense feeling of affect, which is an integrated feeling right through the body and the mind. And what can give such feelings, such experiences, be it sports, ideals, spirituality, hobbies, relationships, that quest has to be optimized in life, sublimated. Paradise is lost for reality to be gained. This brings us to a very important element of intoxication. And there are different types of it. Intoxication of omnipotence, intoxication of fusion, intoxication of participation mystique, which Bowlby talks about when two lovers are sitting in a park completely lost into each other, oblivious of everyone around. This also happens in training programs. When you are training and in the course of it, you go near to somebody who asks a question, you answer to that person, the person then asks back and you again answer back. And then the two people start talking as though nobody else exists in the room. So this is also a situation of participation mystique, which is a very lighter and a smaller manifestation of intoxication we are referring to. Bliss at the breast, which can be literally bliss at the breast, or reverie, which is the adult form of bliss at the breast. Being with the all good object, it can be our ideal teacher or the ideal leader or ideal spiritual master or ideal relative. That itself can bring in intoxication. Admiration of the all good object, even the prospect of admiration brings that intoxication. Intoxication can also come of omnipotence. Intoxication can come in many ways. One way is intoxication of omnipotence, and that can come pathologically. In the newspaper, we often hear of somebody who was in a relationship with X and then cut to pieces X and ate that person up. And this also is because of, at one level, it is to make the person a part of oneself, to overcome the prospect of loss, which is unbearable. In a second sense, there is intoxication and ecstasy of fusion with the object in the process of eating that object. At an unconscious level, an ecstasy is experienced, which over a period of time becomes intoxicating. So then one keeps repeating it all the more. And this unconscious intoxication is at the root of many of the pathologically addictive behaviors. Omnipotence and intoxication can also be experienced unconsciously in the political, social outer area of the outer reality. Say, for example, the ideology and the intoxication of Hitler that Germany experienced. Even though there was nothing much in what he used to say, there was intoxication of omnipotence in a country which felt extremely humiliated after the First World War. And that suddenly in that unbearable suffering, you get this high of omnipotence and intoxication. So on a social grand scale, the intoxication of ideology, of ideological leaders, of celebrities is experienced. Celebrity intoxication is also of omnipotence by identification. The celebrity invites project, or rather, celebrity becomes an occasion to project omnipotence, and then one lives it by identification, and in that living one feels ecstasy, which becomes intoxicating over a period of time. So this unconscious intoxication is at the root of a variety of seemingly irrational behaviors at individual and social scales. And this is at root in normal situations, supernormal situations, and abnormal situations. It's universal. The quest for omnipotence, the experience of unconscious ecstasy, the experience of unconscious intoxication, they are all universal. How do we then sublimate it? One way out is spirituality, that one starts getting used to the intoxication by meditation instead of finding out pathological ways of intoxication. Intoxication with the omnipotent or God. The He of our title, who is He I love more than me, that He becomes here the Guru, the scripture or God. So I love the Guru, scripture or God more than me. And in the unconscious mind, then this becomes more weight on the side of health. So I start loving my health more than my pathological intoxication. So if I get spiritual intoxication in the unconscious mind, it tilts the balance towards health. Very important, this intoxication has been accepted as very important and not condemned as something pathological. So usually when we talk of intoxication, it is in the context of substances and substance abuse. So we look at it as a negative word, but spirituality looks at it in very positive way. In fact, the goal is of many spiritual schools is intoxication. Intoxication with bliss, with ecstasy, and with the experience of enlightenment. With the experience of enlightenment, the intoxication of bliss and ecstasy automatically follow. So here what happens in spiritual context is, I love, who is he, I love more than me, is sublimated to the sublime. It converts to, I love more than me, the greatest in me, over the primal in me. So the early life infantile ecstasy is given up for the spiritual ecstasy. So it becomes a contest between spiritual ecstasy and infantile ecstasy. And usually the spiritual ecstasy wins. And it converts to, I love more than me, the greatest in me and not the primal in me. And if this is so, then the contest becomes between the spiritual ecstasy versus the infantile ecstasy. And if we choose spiritual ecstasy, it automatically helps us overcome, not automatically, but over a period of time, it helps us to overcome the fixation in infantile ecstasy. The infantile part starts reducing in significance for the whole system because an alternative has been found. And in the context between infantile ecstasy and health, the balance starts tilting towards health. Who is he? I love more than me stands sublimated. Thank you.